NATO countries, recognizing the threat from the Russian Federation, are increasing their defense spending and strengthening their support for Ukraine. As soon as tomorrow, the bloc's members will discuss new aid for Kyiv in detail. I'll share the details of this meeting. Other important news from Tuesday is coming up in a brief overview. Putin was late again. The head of the Kremlin delayed the meeting with US President's Special Envoy Witkoff, where peace in Ukraine was discussed by almost 3 hours. How did the negotiations on the American plan to end the war go? We
are feeling quite positive and hope that this work will finally be completed.
Territories, security guarantees, and frozen assets. During his visit to Ireland, President Zelensky once again reminded everyone of Ukraine's red lines in the negotiation process. Kyiv insists on a just, not an imposed peace.
It is important that all of this is fair and transparent, that there are no backroom deals behind Ukraine's back, that nothing is decided without Ukraine, about us, about our future.
Russia is trying to create the illusion of victory on the battlefield. Putin continues to spread fake news about the Russian army's capture of cities: Pokrovsk, Kupiansk, and Vovchansk. What is the real situation? Hello, my name is Mikhail Baranov, and now let's go into more detail. Security guarantees for Ukraine must be clear and understandable so that Russian aggression does not repeat itself in a year. President Volodymyr Zelensky stated this during his first official visit to Ireland. There, he emphasized that any decision must be fair and transparent, but also added that there will be no easy solutions.
This visit to Ireland is taking place at one of the most difficult yet optimistic moments. Now, more than ever, there is a chance to put an end to this war. We understand what is happening. We understand who we are dealing with. The issue is not the difficulty of making decisions. Those who are capable of making decisions will make them. I am capable of making decisions. It is important that all of this is fair and transparent, that there are no backroom deals behind Ukraine's back, that nothing is decided without Ukraine, about us, about our future.
Ireland will allocate €125 million to Ukraine for military as well as energy support. In addition, the countries signed an agreement to strengthen bilateral relations, particularly in the area of cyber resilience. The Irish Prime Minister emphasized that Dublin will continue to support the Ukrainian people for as long as it takes, and added that since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, Ireland has provided Ukraine with €340 million in aid.
Putin has demonstrated complete disregard for the value of human life, international laws, and norms. Even as efforts to end the war advance, he seeks to gain an advantage at the negotiating table by intensifying Russia's relentless pressure on the front lines, Ukrainian cities, and infrastructure. He must never be allowed to succeed. Peace will come to Ukraine, I sincerely hope. I sincerely hope that day will come soon. And Ireland will be ready to cooperate with Ukraine and our international partners to help strengthen this peace and support Ukraine on the path to recovery and reconstruction.
During his visit to Ireland, Volodymyr Zelensky also held talks with the newly elected president of the country, Catherine Connolly, with whom he discussed the return of Ukrainian children taken to Russia and the country's European integration. In addition, the head of Ukraine addressed the Irish Parliament, and before that, he also listened to a report from the Ukrainian delegation following negotiations with the American side about a plan to end the war. Zelensky noted that he personally discussed with his team issues that cannot be resolved over the phone and instructed them to continue constructive cooperation with representatives of President Trump as well as with European partners. Zelensky emphasized that Ukraine takes diplomacy seriously and is interested in genuine peace and security.
Our diplomats are actively working with all partners to ensure that European countries and other members of the coalition of the willing are substantively involved in developing solutions. Ukrainian intelligence will share with our partners the information we have about Russia's real intentions and its attempts to use diplomatic efforts as a cover to weaken sanctions and block important collective European decisions. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Negotiations are taking place in the Kremlin between the American delegation and Putin. The U.S. President's special envoy, Nastya Witkov, brought to Moscow a revised version of the American peace plan, which has been agreed upon with the Ukrainian side. The delegation also included the son-in-law of the U.S. leader, Jared Kushner. He actively participated in the negotiations to end the war and in previous rounds as well. On the eve of the meeting in Moscow, the White House stated that President Trump's administration views the chances for peace positively.
This is a kind of shuttle diplomacy that you have seen from the administration when we communicate with both sides on equal terms. We have put our points down on paper. These points have been thoroughly worked out. But as for the details, I will leave it to the negotiators themselves to conduct the discussion. We are feeling quite positive and hope that this work will finally be completed.
I should note that Steve Witkoff's meeting with Putin began with a 3-hour delay. But he is not the only one who has had to wait for the Kremlin dictator. Putin did not arrive on time for his meeting with Trump in Alaska, and delays at international meetings have become a diplomatic method of exerting pressure for many years now. Angela Merkel, the former Chancellor of Germany, waited for Putin the longest, more than 4 hours. About the same amount of time was spent keeping the fugitive president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, waiting in the hallway. Punctuality was not observed. Putin was also late for meetings with Pope Francis and Queen Elizabeth II. But in 2022, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan made Putin himself pace in front of the cameras while waiting. Before the meeting in the Kremlin, Putin once again made public threats, this time not only against Ukraine but towards all of Europe. He again spoke about certain realities on the ground, about how Russia does not intend to fight with Europe, but it is already prepared for this. He also stated that if Europe starts a war with Russia, soon Moscow will have no one left to negotiate with. Regarding Ukraine, he once again threatened to cut the country off from access to the Black Sea. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry has already responded to the aggressive statements of the Russian dictator. For the second day in a row, Putin has been making statements indicating that he does not plan to stop the war. Yesterday he said he was ready to fight all winter. Today he is threatening seaports and the freedom of navigation. These threats are primarily directed against Odessa, about which President Trump spoke very warmly. Russia must stop the bloodshed that it itself started. If this does not happen and Putin spits in the face of the world again, there must be consequences. Russia must stop wasting the world's time, which should be a time of peace. Andriy Sybiha, Ukraine's foreign ministers on the social network X. Understanding the threats coming from Russia, NATO countries are increasing their defense spending and support for Ukraine. As soon as tomorrow, the foreign ministers of the 32 alliance countries will discuss aid to Kyiv. At the bloc's headquarters, the results of the year will be summed up and the Ukrainian delegation, headed by Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha, will be received. It is expected that new aid packages will be announced. All the details of the upcoming meeting will be reported by Freedom TV channel's special correspondent in Europe, Vitaly Sizov. At the
NATO headquarters, it is believed that Ukraine, the US, and the alliance countries want peace and are working to achieve it. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte noted that, at present, establishing peace depends on Russia's decision. But so far, Moscow is only demonstrating that it wants to continue the bloodshed.
It's hard to say. I know that the Americans are doing everything possible for peace. Just look at the numbers. We see that 20,000 Russians are dying every month. We see heavy losses on the Ukrainian side as well. Ukrainians are fiercely defending their country, but many Ukrainians are dying in the war. President Trump called it a meat grinder. This needs to stop. We've seen footage of Putin dressed up in military uniform. At the same time, he is responsible for the deaths of thousands of his own soldiers.
At the alliance headquarters in Brussels, foreign ministers will discuss preparations for the next summit in Turkey, security threats and challenges, including those coming from Russia, as well as progress toward increasing defense spending, up to 5% of the gross domestic product. Russia's war against Ukraine will be discussed in a meeting of the Ukraine NATO Council with the participation of the Ukrainian Foreign Minister, Andriy Sybiha, and the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas. The allies will also discuss the purchase of American weapons for Ukraine. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte stated that he is ready for negotiations of any complexity in order to ensure at least $1 billion per month for the purchase of American weapons.
We started in August with the first billion per month, and now we have 4 billion, so we still have some things to do in December. Next year, we will also need to secure at least 1 billion per month for the purchase of necessary weapons, so I have put forward several proposals. so that everything this year is done within the framework of the agreement. And if I have to go around with my hand out for Ukraine, I will do it for the sake of Ukraine's interests. Many allies have already made their contributions. We have seen recent statements from Norway, the Netherlands, Canada, and other countries. I think right now about 2 or 3 alliances are participating in the Pearl program, and this month we have done much more.
The head of NATO is ready to continue supporting Ukraine on its path to peace. Mark Rutte emphasized that the security of NATO countries directly depends on security in Ukraine. That is why it is necessary to support Washington's peace initiatives.
Speaking about Ukraine, we all recognize that our security is closely interconnected, and we are all working to put an end to the war against Ukraine and to establish a just and lasting peace. We welcome the ongoing efforts of the United States aimed at achieving this goal, and I am confident that these continuous efforts will ultimately lead to the restoration of peace in Europe.
Regardless of the track of political negotiations, the alliance continues to work on meeting Ukraine's military needs, and still believes that this is in the interest of the bloc. The head of NATO expects that as a result of the meeting, which will take place tomorrow, new aid packages for Ukraine will be announced. Vitaly Sizov, Ruslan Kuzgov from Brussels for Freedom TV channel.
And now to other important news. Tuesday. In Kramatorsk, Donetsk region, emergency rescue operations have been completed following a Russian strike. The Russian army attacked a residential apartment building the day before. As a result of the attack, a woman was killed. Her body was pulled from the rubble by rescuers. Another resident of the building was saved. She was evacuated from under the collapsed structures of the 2nd and 3rd floors. In total, 5 people are known to have been injured. Rescuers say that Russian forces struck the target again, which made their work significantly more difficult. A man who was wounded during the shelling of Kyiv has died in the hospital, November 29th. According to Mayor Vitaly Klitschko, the victim was in serious condition. He became the 3rd victim of the massive Russian strike on the Ukrainian capital last weekend. 2 people were injured as a result of Russian attacks on the Dnipropetrovsk region. The Russians struck the region with missiles, drones, and artillery. Today, Dnipro is in mourning for those killed in yesterday's Russian attack. 4 deaths have been reported. At least 45 people were injured. A day after this missile strike, 24 people remain in hospitals. The lives of 3 are still in danger. Immediately after the attack, 39 injured people were brought to just one of the city's medical centers, many with severe wounds. The stories of those who managed to survive are covered in our correspondent's report.
It was an explosion, like lightning, just like that, and then nothing else.
68-year-old Alla is one of those who found herself at the epicenter of the Russian missile explosion in Dnipro on the morning of December 1st. The woman works as a cook in a small family cafe located on the 1st floor of an office building. She says that at the moment of the missile attack, she was near the window and the blast wave literally threw her back.
All night, all I could think about was that explosion. And in the morning when I got up, that explosion was still right before my eyes and nothing else.
Alla's son immediately took her to the hospital. They were working together. He himself was not injured. Doctors say the woman suffered a head wound and multiple cuts. On the morning of December 1st, Mikhail also found himself at the epicenter of the explosion. He was installing solar panels on the roof of the building that was hit by the missile.
What probably saved me was that I was under the panel. I was leaning on the elbow that got injured, and with my left hand, I was turning and installing the panel. There was still a row of panels in front of me, at least 9, and as a result, you could say I came out almost unscathed. Just a small piece of shrapnel in my leg and a lost elbow.
The man says that when he realized how serious his arm injury was, he quickly reacted and tied off his arm above the elbow to prevent major blood loss.
I found the cable we used to pull the panels, clamped it in my teeth as best I could, pulled it tight, and tied it off. Once I tied it, I realized the cable was 30 meters long, so I looked for something to cut it with because I wouldn't get far dragging a 30-meter cable. I cut the cable with wire cutters.
Thanks to this, Mikhail managed to save his hand according to the doctors. They recall that on the morning of December 1st, just a few minutes after the missile strike, wounded people started arriving one after another.
A hit. This wasn't the first time, and I already knew that things were about to get really bad. We'd be working in the emergency department. Literally about 10 minutes later, the phone rang. The head of the department said that all available neurosurgeons should go down to the emergency department. And the work began.
A total of 39 people were brought to this hospital alone. 13 of them are in intensive care. The lives of 3 are still in danger. Unfortunately, there were wounds and amputations.
Unfortunately, by morning there were also amputations. And there are very severe traumatic brain injuries. There are also eye injuries and many fractures.
The Russian forces launched a missile strike on one of the central districts of Dnipro on the morning of December 1st, when people had already arrived at work. As a result, 4 people were killed and 45 were injured. Several dozen cars were destroyed, 100 were damaged, as well as several educational institutions and residential buildings. Natalia Gusu, Vladimir Shtengelov from Dnipro, for Freedom TV channel.
Ukrainian military intelligence struck important elements of the Russian air defense in Donbas. This was reported by the GUR, who also showed footage of the operation. It took place on November 29th. 1 launcher and 2 radar stations came under fire. Such strikes significantly reduced the Russians' ability to control the airspace over Donbas, Ukrainian intelligence emphasized. This year, Russia has occupied less than 1% of Ukrainian territory, and the cost of this advance is more than 200,000 dead and wounded Russian soldiers. These figures are cited by journalists from the Washington Post. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the total losses of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine have already exceeded 1,175,000 military personnel. Meanwhile, Putin continues to claim new military victories for his army. Who is the Kremlin's bluff aimed at, and what is the real situation at the front? We'll tell you in the next segment.
Move faster. Touch it. Touch it that way. The hottest area is the Pokrovsk direction. Special operations forces are clearing out a mine that Russian infantry managed to infiltrate. Ukrainian soldiers shared footage and details of the successful operation on social media. The enemy on the territory of the industrial facility was detected by aerial reconnaissance pilots and special operations forces waiting for favorable weather conditions, and with drone support set out on the mission and eliminated the enemy without losses. In the opposite sector, they have contact. Russians often, when they have contact, don't shoot, but instead call in their pilots with FPV drones, and they immediately fly toward us. That's why we stayed there for about 5 to 10 minutes and then pulled back. After that, our guys dealt with their FPV operators. In addition, Ukrainian Special Operations Forces successfully struck Russian targets in 2 regions, destroying with drones a concentration of Russian troops in Pokrovsk and an ammunition depot in Beloyarivka, Donetsk region, and in Luhansk they burned down a fuel and lubricants warehouse. Meanwhile, in Moscow, they once again claim to have allegedly captured 3 Ukrainian cities at once: Pokrovsk, Kupiansk, and Vovchansk. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine refuted this information and assured that the Ukrainian army continues to hold key positions. And the Russian statement is nothing more than another round of propaganda and an attempt by the Kremlin to influence participants in international negotiations. Analysts add that Russian generals are deliberately immersing Putin in a parallel world of imaginary victories.
Yet another territorial gain on credit and another statement claiming that Pokrovsk has been captured. Of course, you could laugh at this, but I'm afraid all of this will be fed to Vitkov again, and there will be renewed pressure as if the situation is developing. On the battlefield, this does not benefit the Ukrainian army.
For more than a month, Putin has been convincing Russians that the Russian army has captured Kupiansk, and that supposedly 15 battalions of the Ukrainian army are encircled there. But the Joint Forces Group of the Ukrainian Armed Forces stated that most of the city is under the control of Ukrainian troops, and only isolated groups of Russian invaders are holding positions in the northern districts.
If everything were going well, or at least unfolding as if the Russian deadlines and the implementation of their plans had been met, then probably, at the very least, they wouldn't have had to use one of the Putins in military uniform today to carry out an information psychological special operation.
The General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces has counted 131 battles along the entire front line since the beginning of the day. The Russians tried to break through the Ukrainian defenses in the Lyman direction 29 times. Another 21 enemy assaults were repelled by the defense forces in the Kostiantynivka sector. of the front line. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine noted that the Russian army has intensified airstrikes on Ukraine over the past 11 months. The Russians have already dropped nearly 44,000 guided aerial bombs. The hottest month in terms of the number of guided bombs with which the Russian army attacked our units was October 2025. A total of 5,328 guided aerial bombs were recorded. This year, the Russian army has intensified its aerial terror. For comparison, during 2024, enemy aircraft dropped nearly 40,000 guided aerial bombs. On average, that's 109 guided bombs per day. In the first 11 months of 2025, nearly 44,000 guided aerial bombs. That's an average of 130 guided bombs per day. And now, a statement from the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. Under the cover of thick fog, the Russians tried to break through Ukrainian positions unnoticed at one section of the front. However, the assault troops on motorcycles were spotted and eliminated by Ukrainian tank crews. In just the past day, the defense forces have eliminated 1,110 Russian occupiers, and the total losses of the Russian army since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine have already exceeded 1,175,000 soldiers. These are the figures reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. The defense forces also destroyed 1 armored combat vehicle, 14 artillery systems, and 49 units of Russian automotive and special equipment.